Hey, reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at the medic. The medic is, I think, arguably the strongest addition in Brood War to the Terrans. It helped to fix a whole lot of things. A lot of people really liked it. It was a really nice unit in the campaign, and I'll be completely honest, it's one of the contributing reasons why in StarCraft 2 I rarely ladder with the Terrans. And the primary reason for that is I prefer medics to medevacs, and I can't use medics. I also, complete aside, prefer Goliaths to Thors, and I can't use Goliaths. And I prefer Diamondbacks to almost every vehicle that the Terrans have. Maybe excepting Goliaths, possibly siege tanks. And so the result is I rarely ladder with them because I'm just missing all of the toys I like playing with. And so, surprise, surprise, when we heard that the core set was coming out, I heard the medic was coming, and I'm just like, oh, that's great. Even as part of the core set, we'll get it early on. And I was really curious about the rules, and we didn't see the rules at all. Published online, available openly for all of us. You had to go in person to a place like Eschenspiel in order to see them. And then it was, pretty strictly controlled in terms of information coming out to the rest of us. And so the first place I got to see them was in open beta. And I'm not going to lie, I got my login info. Within 10 minutes, I was logged in. And the first thing that I pulled up was the medic, because I was very curious to see mechanically how they were going to do this. And I was not let down. I think it's a very elegant way of doing it. I think you're really going to like it in helping to adapt a very interesting unit because it doesn't really have an attack, right? In the RTS game, and how we adapt it to the tabletop miniatures game, where you've got different phases and different things, and you want units to be able to do interesting things and tactically important things in every phase. And so to start off with, first of all, shout out to the Brood War medic, which has changed a lot about how Terrans have played bio for a long time. We're going to look at the stats and special rules. We'll take a look at offensive and defensive abilities. Offensive, I'm going to be honest, is a bit of a joke. But that is fitting, as you'll soon discover. We're going to look at the role that it fills in your army. We'll figure out whether it lines up with the RTS, and answering the all-critical question, should you buy these things? And so taking a look at it, first of all, we note this is a support unit. Every army has one support unit currently, and this one only takes up one supply. So it's really quite easy to field. You get 3 of them as a single unit. Try to keep it at least 2 if you want to use that one supply for controlling objectives and such. And then you'll notice that the stat line is exactly the same as a Marine. Same speed, same saves, same hit points, same size, which is really nice, okay? Points cost is extremely low at 110. This is one of the cheapest units we currently have available to us in the game. And you'll also notice, while they have abilities in the movement phase and the combat phase, they don't have any dedicated abilities in the assault phase, which tells us that not every unit's going to get that, and that's not a bad thing. In this particular case, they also have 2 abilities that can happen in any phase. These are more likely to happen in certain phases rather than others, but technically you can use them at any time. And so we'll start there because I think that these any phase abilities are part of the reason why you would consider taking a medic. And the first is life support, and it's a very simple one. It just says that whenever a friendly biological unit, so this is not going to affect a Goliath, down the line a siege tank, a vulture, a Hellion, a Thor, anything that is mechanical or structural, only affects biological units. Whenever it suffers damage within 4 inches, so you don't have to declare this before the attack is made, you declare it when damage is being suffered. Okay, which is really nice. You reduce the total damage before allocating wounds to the unit by 1 for each model in this unit that is within 4 inches of the damaged unit. Now, take note, number 1, you only need to be within range of 1 model from the damaged unit. So you don't have to have them really far up. It's not like they need to cover half of the unit or every model in the unit within that 4-inch radius. You can have them just with the 1 token person maybe who moved, that was the lead model, and then everybody else halos forward from that. You can just move your medics so they're all within 4 inches of that 1 model that's there in the very back. And that then gives you the ability to affect the entire unit with all of your medics, which is really nice. You'll also notice that this reduces the total damage. It doesn't reduce hits. So if a hit would do, say, 2 damage to a unit, you're not blocking 4 of the hits. You'd be blocking 2 of those hits because you'd be blocking all of that damage. Okay, suffice it to say, in a little bit, we're going to discuss this a little further because there are some nice upgrades that get you to the number 4, which is why I keep throwing around the number 4, because in my mind, that upgrade should automatically be bought. You should always be buying that ability pretty much every time. But just suffice it to say, you're dealing with damage, not hits. That's an important distinction regarding how the medic works. Okay. But it allows you to do this as a reaction for only one command point, which, when we end up talking about tactical cards, you'll find getting one command point to do this with is extremely easy to do for a relatively low cost to your Vespene gas, which is really nice. The second ability that you get, and again, a reaction, so you can use it when something triggers and would occur, you can make it so that when a friendly unit within 4 inches of any of these medics, not a certain number, any one of them, receives a debuff, you can remove all debuffs from the unit. Now note, it does not give you immunity to debuffs for the rest of the turn. So the timing on this is important. If you have reason to believe you're going to get stacked with multiple debuffs in a single turn, do you trigger off of the first one? Do you wait until a second one tries to hit that unit and then try to remove it? Keep in mind, you can also only do one reaction per activation. So doing restoration would come at the expense of not doing, say, life support, for example. At least with, so at least as far as the rules are currently written, that is my understanding. It's only one reaction per activation. And there's even a big asterisk to all of these, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about defensive abilities, okay? But just suffice it to say, both of these are really useful. The debuff ability exists for all factions so far on some unit. It's available to the Zergs on Queens. It's available to the Protoss on Sentries. More on Sentries a little bit later. Life support does exist on Queens in a form. It looks a little bit different because, of course, it's only got one model, right? But the result is both of these are pretty useful, right? I mean, the debuff removal is going to be very useful against, vile roaches. It'll be very useful against, other medics, ironically, from the other side of the army, potentially against marauders. There's all kinds of stuff now. Not a whole lot that does debuffs, but where they exist, they can be pretty powerful. So having that ability is really nice. When we get into the movement phase, this is, I think, some of the more interesting stuff that you get to do with medics. The med pack ability is just the exact same thing as life support, except that it's done as an active ability on the medic's turn, and it's removing damage that's already there. Okay, more on how you can utilize this quite effectively to cover over some of the problems with things like Marines and Marauders. But just suffice it to say, for now, it's the exact same concept, right? You're healing a certain amount where that is the number of models that are within 4 inches of the target unit, right? And again, friendly biological only, so it doesn't affect mechanical and it doesn't affect structures. And then we got optical flare. Optical flare, you get to select an enemy unit within 12 inches of at least one model in this unit. And then until the end of the round, so this is going to affect stuff in the movement phase, but most importantly, stuff in the assault phase, you get to apply a debuff of range 6 to that unit's ranged weapons, and it cannot use the long range keyword. Okay? Now, this costs you 2 command points. This is a relatively expensive upgrade. Okay? Especially since, again, you'd have to use it potentially every single turn because it only applies until the end of the round. So if you want to lock down that unit again on the following turn, 2 more command points, and the medic has to activate in order to do it, right? So, there's a lot to manage going on here. But it means, if you can cut something's range from 16 inches down to 10 or 12 inches down to 6, you're turning a ranged attack unit into an almost close combat unit, which is really nice. I'll add on strategically, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, when you choose to activate the medic, and thus when you choose to use this ability also really matters in terms of the amount of leverage that you're going to get out of it. But just suffice it to say, there are beta testers right now that I've spoken to online who are telling me they use medics almost exclusively for this ability. They're not taking them necessarily for medical purposes. They're taking them for flair. And I see the reason why. You could really mess up somebody's day with clever positioning, clever utilization, and then optical flare. And in an ideal world, they don't have the assets nearby to remove that flare. And thus, you have the ability to kind of control the flow of damage going towards your army, which every Terran in the world really likes, right? And then when we go to the combat phase, I'm going to be honest, this is really bad, right? And arguably, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think this is going to be the worst close combat ability we're going to see in the game. You'll notice it is exactly the same as Marines that don't have the bayonet upgrade from the Marine video that we did. But what makes it worse is Marines at least start with 6 models, right? And they can go up to 9. This one maxes out at 3. So on average, since they're only contributing a maximum of 3 dice, and as you start losing models even less than that, on average, you're looking at 1 hit doing 1 point of damage, assuming they don't save. And their chance of saving is about the same, at least, if not better than your chance of rolling a hit in the first place. And that assumes no evade save, right? So while you technically can do damage with this unit, realistically, in a given game, you're talking maybe 1 point of damage. You might get 1 zergling. You might chip away at 1 marine, and that's it. So realistically, not a damage option. This is a ditch effort to protect your medics, but in an ideal world, you have something else that's protecting your medics, okay? Because they can't really do that much on their own. When looking at their abilities, there are 3 abilities you can purchase for them. We're actually going to start from the bottom and then work our way up, okay? So with the bottom one, you have the Stabilizer Med Packs, and this is a 30-point upgrade currently as of this recording. We'll see if that changes, where effectively when using Life Support or Med Pack, you can treat it as having 1 additional model. So instead of having 3 models within range, you count as having 4 models in range. See what I did there? That's why I keep using the number 4. In my mind, this right here is worth purchasing 10 times out of 10 when you purchase medics. And the reason why is because it means even if you only have 1 model within range, you're at least blocking 2, which is the life of 1 marine, right? And against some low-level damage options, it might block all the damage from an attack, which if you're using things like Stim Pack on your Marines or your Marauders, means you can block all the damage coming in, which could mean not triggering having to disperse your wounds from something like Stim Pack, which is a really big deal. So in my opinion, Stabilizer Med Packs 100% of the time should be taken. Related to that, though, we have the A13 Flash Grenade Launcher, which just increases the range of flare from 12 inches to 18 inches. At 20 points, this is not that expensive, and it means you can sit a lot further back from enemy targets and still hit them. And depending on the size of the board, it means that as long as you keep your medics relatively central, you can inflict a penalty on enemies even on much further out objectives, which is really nice. I'm not sure you absolutely need these, mostly because if you're running multiple medic squads, you might not need the extra range. You might be okay. Furthermore, it depends on what your opponent's running, right? So if you have reason to believe that you might be going against, say, a Terran heavy meta, because people really like their Marines and they really like their medics and they really like their Marauders or Goliaths or whatever, and so you have reason to believe people are going to be running more Terrans, most Terrans are perfectly okay being within 12 inches of you. They don't necessarily want to get very far away. They might want to move in pretty close, but not necessarily be at close combat. And so because of that, they're willing to park within 6 inches because maybe they took the slug thrower upgrade or they took the grenades upgrade, right? Or something like that. And if that's the case, then you might find that 12 inches is perfectly acceptable. But in some cases, if you're going against a long range attack army, if you have reason to believe you're going to be fighting a lot of Hydras, you're going to be fighting a lot of Stalkers or something else like that, having the flare, the grenade launcher for the flare could be a really nice bonus. So you can purchase these if you want to. Maybe try it out and see if it's worth the 20 points or whether you rarely use it because of how you choose to play. But I could see that one being very useful. The most situational one for me is the Advanced Medic Facilities. And this one is a 40-point upgrade. So you're starting at a base cost of 150, potentially 180 or even up to 200 if you take all the upgrades, as it currently stands here in open beta. And what it does is it reduces the supply value for the purpose of supply pool to 0. So it'll still count as 1 supply when within range of an objective and for scoring purposes, as long as it has 2 to 3 models in it, okay? But for the purpose of building out your army and how much supply you're allowed to have out on the table when you're doing deployment and stuff, it counts as 0. This can be really useful, because it means you can get more of your attack stuff out there, right? If you want to be able to get a Goliath and 2 big squads of Marines, and you have a starting supply of 6, and you really, really want medics to help you out, and I've been in that situation before, paying 40 minerals to give you that all-important supply reduction, so you're helping yourself with a different resource entirely, could be worthwhile. Because it could be the difference between you losing a bunch of Marines because you stemmed and then they took wounds, or not losing a bunch of Marines. it could completely shift the entire battle. At the same time, depending on your loadout, one, from a supply pool perspective, it is very possible you won't need this for the sake of army composition. And it's very possible, depending on, again, the kinds of stuff you're running, if you're running a lot of smaller squads, so fitting enough stuff into your supply pool, especially that starting supply pool, isn't a really big deal, it may not be as necessary. Okay, so I think this one's probably the most situational. It's going to really depend on what it is that you're running around it. That being said, and I love this, there are good reasons to take all of these. There's only one of them that I think is an absolute auto-include. I think all three of them are extremely useful. And if you are running a 200-point medic squad, obviously depending on how many points you're playing at, putting that much into a 6-wound unit may not necessarily be the best goal, but it could be really effective for whatever it is you're trying to do. And so when looking at your offensive abilities, in the movement phase, you really can't do much offensively. I'm going to get to optical flare later because it feels like an offensive ability. It is not in my mind. It counts very solidly as a defensive ability, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The important thing about the movement phase is you're going to need to be moving to keep up with the rest of everybody else. So maybe that's actually okay. And the fact that you could easily be saving yourself from performing something offensively that, let's just be honest, would probably not be very effective anyway, means it's maybe actually helping you out to not have any abilities that you're doing there that's an offensive one, be taking away from the role that this is supposed to provide for us. In the assault phase, again, it doesn't have literally anything. There's no special abilities at all that we can use. Really, that's for the best because, one, this allows you to move if needed. So that way, for example, in the movement phase, you can use an ability like, say, med pack on a unit that's close to you. And then in the assault phase, before people start attacking, you can reposition the medic squad where you might need them in advance to help another unit, maybe to prevent them from suffering damage, because then you can use your life support abilities, right? Or something like that. Maybe you moved in a specific direction so you could use flare, but then maybe near the beginning of the assault phase, you can maneuver around your medic so that way your medic is now in a better position to help where the fighting is going to be the hardest. Because now the unit that might have done damage to one of your units over in the first position isn't going to be doing a lot of damage because of optical flare. Right. So like there are benefits to that. It also means in the assault phase, it is easier to pass faster because you might find you might not need to activate this unit at all. Right. And so since Terran are not very good in general in close combat, at least being able to go first and do damage to units that ran into you, it could end up saving an awful lot of wounds a little bit later. Right. And that is quite advantageous for the Terran. And then finally in the combat phase, it's really bad. Okay, like it's really bad. Again, 1 to 3 attacks on a 5+1 damage, no surge. This is probably the worst close combat stat line we're going to see in the game. The most important thing the medic is going to be doing in the close combat phase, assuming that you have CP available to spend, is going to be blocking wounds. I'm going to be honest. That is the most important thing they're going to be doing. In an ideal world, that is all that they end up doing for the entire game, because if they find themselves in close combat, they are not going to do very well. Okay, so this is not an offensive unit. This is a purely defensive and support unit. And toward that end, their abilities here are really, really good, especially for the points cost that you're spending. In the movement phase, honestly, this is probably going to be the most complicated part of medics. Okay, if you're running medics, this is going to be the hardest part because your positioning is going to be important, because for things like life support, for things like med pack, you're trying to decide how many models do I want within range of a specific unit. And we're going to do a whole tactical series once the rules go live and we know what the rules are and we have reason to believe there aren't going to be dramatic changes. We're going to do a whole series on positioning and tactical usage of medics. But just suffice it to say for now, that positioning is going to be very critical for how much you can actually get out of your abilities. Your med pack ability is going to be able to remove 1 to 3, potentially +1 if you buy the upgrade, so somewhere between 2 and 4 wounds from an ally. That is going to be very important because of stim pack. Because since stim pack requires you to take 2 non-lethal wounds, so you suffer 2 wounds on the unit, but you don't allocate them, so you're not destroying any models. And then they gain the added movement and the precision 3 that they need for later in the turn. It is really nice that with something like med pack, you could then follow up, move up close to one of your units, use your med pack on them, and remove those non-lethal wounds. right? Which is really, really nice, right? And if it's something like a Marauder where it might have suffered some wounds in battle, and then it also stemmed on top of that, you might even be able to remove up to 4 off of that, which is really, really nice. Again, it's only biological, so this is not going to help your Goliaths at all when we first start out the game. But being able to pump up Jim Raynor, being able to remove some of the potential floating damage over your Marines, over your Marauders, actual damage suffered by your Marauders, all of that is extremely useful. And you can make it more reliable if you take that simple 30-point upgrade. And then for optical flare, again, enemies within 12 inches are going to be gaining that debuff. The benefit behind this, and from a tactical perspective, what you need to be thinking about even now, is you ideally want to use this after the unit you intend to target has already performed its move action. Okay, there are some situations, we'll talk about those in about 40 seconds, where you can use it on a unit that hasn't activated yet. But in an ideal world, you want that unit to be activated so you know exactly where it's going to be come the start of the assault phase. And then you hit it with flare. And then for the rest of the movement phase, take all of your units and make sure that they are beyond the standard range minus 6 inches of that unit. And now that unit that they were planning on doing damage, their stalker unit, their big Marine squad that has 9 men in it or something like that, it's a really big deal if a Marine squad goes from 8 C-14s and an AG-12 to just an AG-12. Because now they're going from 18 shots to 2 shots. And they're only surging against armored targets. So that weapon won't even get a surge result against something like, say, a Marine squad or a medic squad. That is a really big deal. And if they stim packed before doing that, so now they suffered a couple wounds to give themselves precision 3, like, yay, they're going to turn their 2 misses potentially into hits. Big whoop. You're going to do almost no damage to the unit when you were planning on decimating a unit. Okay, this is a really big deal. Now, there is one situation where you can use it on a unit that hasn't activated yet. And that is if you want a unit to move closer to you in order to be effective. So you could be like, okay, you're a stalker unit, you have quite a bit of movement and mobility, and you've got a good bit of range, right? I mean, they can have potentially up to like a long range 16 if you build them the right way, with a pretty good surge result against specific targets. If you hit them with flare, what you're doing is you're encouraging them to come closer. And if you want to be able to target them with something like, say, Marauders, and you didn't take a long range upgrade or something else like that, just being able to say to long range, long hitting units, hey, you got to get in a good bit closer, so now you're closer to us. Oh, and now even if you choose to use evades or something like that, now you're going to be within our anti-evade 1 range for specific units, or even anti-evade 2 range, depending on what kinds of things you're looking at. There's all different kinds of stuff, right, that you can do. And I think that is going to be highly, highly effective for getting the opponent again to play the way you want to play. So suffice it to say for now, optical flare is going to be one of the more critical things that I think is going to make the difference between your person who's newer to playing Terran and your master at playing Terran. It's going to be one of those mastery elements that's going to really help set you apart and give you a lot more effectiveness with your force as you learn to use medics. And again, from a unit that I think we all thought was going to be really darn boring. It's the unit you put behind everybody else, and they get, sorry for the sound effect there, guys, but they end up giving you your health to the back. They're blocking wounds. Like, we thought that's all they're going to do. They're going to be doing a whole lot more than that, which is really cool. In the assault phase, we're just going to be doing reactions pretty much. Like, you can do movement, right? Again, to reposition to another place where you're needed. But what you're primarily doing is you're going to be doing life support and then, as necessary, restoration. And especially be watching out for those vile roaches. If somebody's running vile roaches for their Zerg, that is one of the most important debuffs you're going to be able to remove. We'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about your abilities and stuff. But just suffice it to say, that is going to be one of the most important ones to remove. Okay. Also opposing optical flares, okay? But just suffice it to say, in the assault phase, that's going to be one of the big ones coming up. Life support's going to be important just for, again, hopefully helping to trigger, prevent wounds from coming in, keep more of your bodies on the table, possibly make it so that your stim pack wounds aren't even coming up, which is a really, really big deal. And then restoration, again, just doing its job as needed. In the combat phase, I'm going to be completely honest, this is the hope and pray portion. In an ideal world, you are only using life support and restoration. You are not fighting. Okay. But this is also a case where if you're using these abilities, any of your abilities, it is probably a sign that your units, which are not very good in close combat, are engaged in close combat, and you really, really need them to stay on the map. So I'm going to be honest. If you're running medics and you're really leaning into medics, they're going to be very command point heavy. You are going to be using a lot of CPs for them, which means a lot of your abilities on those cards you're not going to be using at all. You're going to be saving that for medics to be able to save you. But if you do, you might find that you are way more effective than your opponent thinks you are, purely because of this tiny little unit. Because this is, I think, so far, the best support unit in the game. It admittedly has the worst attacks out of any of the support units in the game as well, so I think it's pretty fair. And it's a relatively squishy one by comparison to the others, but still a pretty effective unit. So what role is this thing going to fill? Well, it's going to fill some debuff clearing, right? Which is extremely useful against medics because, again, they got that optical flare. You want your Marines to be able to fire at their full effectiveness. So you're going to want to be able to protect yourself against opposing medics also using optical flare. It's going to be extremely useful against vile roaches. The vile roaches inflict a penalty. It's been fluctuating. Sometimes it's like -1 to hit. Sometimes it's -1 rate of attack. Whatever way it's currently written whenever it goes to live, just know that's really bad, okay? Especially if they're hitting something like Marines that are kind of counting on, we've got a large volume of shots coming out. We've got precision 3. We've already suffered wounds on ourselves to get this. You're really going to want to watch out for vile roaches because however it ends up finally falling, this is going to be really bad for them. -1 ROA is the worst because it's removing half of your potential ceiling for hits. So even if you're pretty good at getting hits, you're not going to get nearly as many as you could have, even if you had the 4+ because your ceiling is going down. You're physically rolling less dice. You have less shots going out, which means you can get less hits and thus you can do less damage. Technically, it can also protect you from the concussive shells from Marauders. We don't currently actually have any debuffs coming out from the Protoss, interestingly enough. Those are going to come, probably, as we go along, but at least for now, you can technically do this against Marauders. They can inflict with their concussive shells a -3 inches to your charge range. I wouldn't worry as much about that, only because in general, Terrans don't really want to be charging, so you won't really be charging all that often, right? Like, you could technically do it if there was a unit that only had, like, 2 models, and for whatever reason, you had reason to believe they wouldn't be destroyed, but maybe, with shooting, but maybe you could beat them with bayonets or something like that. You might consider charging in, but again, I don't know why you wouldn't just, in the assault phase, you can technically charge, but why wouldn't you just shoot them in the assault phase and get rid of them? So, like, in general, I tend to think you're not likely to be using the debuff removal in that case, but you technically can. It technically exists. Let me know down in the comments below if you can think of any situation where that would actually come up. I don't think it will, but just suffice it to say, just a thing to think about. It's also a very cheap unit, right? Like, you can take it for as little as 110, which is really nice. You can fit these in alongside whatever else it is that you want to do. I would effectively say you're actually going to be paying 140 because, again, I feel like you should always take that stabilizer medpack bonus that gives you count as having 1 extra model being in range. It's just going to make you a lot better, a lot more efficient. And again, that's saving 2 Marines every single time. And that's really, really nice. And then, of course, you can heal. You do have to be near allies, okay? And the biggest thing you need to remember is this is not a frontline unit. You have to keep this unit behind units that can take hits for it because 6 wounds total, past a 5+ save, and currently, I don't think any way to really use the evade save reliably means this unit's going to fall apart very quickly. That is a maximum of 9 wounds you could suffer on average past saves. That is not very good. So in my mind, this unit should be pretty far back while still maintaining a number of models within range. You really want to halo everybody around these guys to make sure that the enemy can't get in really close, okay? And does this match the computer game? I mean, it's a purely support unit effectively. I mean, technically it can do damage in close combat. Realistically, you're going to be removing like 1 Zerg per game with these guys. So I feel like it's within the margin of error for the fact that we're translating it to a tabletop game. It is extremely useful for keeping your forces alive. You really need it to kind of work in conjunction with the rest of your force. You're not going to spam all medics. But I'd also think you would do a lot better including these than not including these, right? Spamming a lot of other stuff, all Marines without medics, you might find that you're actually less advantageous that way too, right? And so you have a unit that's, I mean, again, very similar to the medevac. It can't transport anybody, but very similar to the medevac, but with a bioground barracks unit. And so I would say, yes, this is a very faithful one. I think it even borrows from, I think the flare is from like Heroes of the Storm or something like that. I feel like there is a medic character that gets the flare ability, and I want to say it's from Heroes of the Storm. I honestly can't remember. But suffice it to say, like, it all lines up, and it's a really clever way of including a unit that is not boring, that is tactically interesting in every single phase, that could have been the most boring unit in the game. And not even close. The most boring unit in the game. And so, toward the question, should you buy these? I think the answer is yes. I don't think you necessarily need a 1-to-1 for every single other biological unit that you run. But I do think smattering a bunch of these in, even if you just get the core set and you buy one extra pack of medics, I think having 2 medic units running around, you will find is extremely useful. If for no other reason, then you can remove the stuff you're removing from Stim Pack. And that is extremely nice. It is a very cheap way to preserve your Marines, right? When you consider all of the potential bonuses you could try to buy. If you're buying 3 units of Marines, you could buy them a combat shield each, or you could just buy 1 unit of medics, and you might find that you're actually more efficient with the medics than you are with the combat shields. Okay. Also, currently, we currently have a lot of biological units so far, right? So obviously, you know, Marines, like you see down there in the picture, but also Marauders are going to be a holdout of the armies. You've got heroes like Jim Raynor. I suspect the overwhelming majority of heroes are going to have the biological keyword. Obviously, if we get, you know, Jim in a Vulture, or we end up getting, I don't know, somebody in a Viking, right, or something like that as a future unit, you might find that they don't have the biological keyword, but I suspect the overwhelming majority of heroes are going to have that keyword. But also, you know, ghosts are still coming down the line. I suspect that, as I mentioned in my video, that's probably going to be our psionic unit that we're getting next. I think Reapers are going to make an appearance because they're mentioned casually in the rule book, and why wouldn't you, right? I mean, we have Raptor Zerglings that can jump up stuff. Why not include Reapers as well? Fire Bats, they've already mentioned they are planning on doing Fire Bats at some point in the future. So I suspect that we're going to have that as another biological unit. And so just down the line, over the years that new releases are coming down, I think the relevance of the medic, even if we do end up getting medivacs that have the ability to drop ship troops, I think just the cheapness and yet the versatility and effectiveness of the medic is going to remain for a long time. And then finally, just the models look really good, right? I mean, you know, just taking a look, first of all, we get a mix of right-handed and left-handed models, which is really cool. You know, we've got some cool and dynamic poses. They've got those really epic shields. I'm a big shield guy myself. And so because of that, like, I just think you could do a whole lot worse than painting up a bunch of these. It's not going to be a particularly difficult paint job, other than obviously the fact that sometimes it's difficult to make models look really white, because white is such a lighter color than typically the color of the plastic. And so because of that, like, you know, that might be a little bit tricky, but like on the whole, I think this is the jam. This is where you want to go. So my recommendation is run these things. You don't necessarily need a lot of them. I think fielding like 2 of them is going to be just fine. Maybe 3. Depends on how much debuffing you want to do, how much wound prevention and mitigation you want to do, and obviously what points level you're playing at, right? Because if you're playing at like 600 to 800 points, you're playing a skirmish game at 1,000 points or less, you know, shelling out 140 to 200 points per unit is going to be pretty substantial to take medics. But if you're playing at like 2,000 especially, I think at least 2 you'd be just fine doing. But what do you think? Do you think that these are just too fragile? They're going to be worked down too quickly by the enemy, that they aren't really going to make much back for you in terms of value? Do you think that this thing is just overpowered, especially with its ability to basically just shut down a shooting unit for a turn? And if they don't happen to have the small number of units that can remove debuffs, like, they're just overpowered. They could just completely shut down an entire side of the table with a 110, 140 point unit. Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.